I found a hidden camera inside my smoke detector on an ordinary Wednesday morning. I put it back, screwed the cover on, went to work. That was not a rational decision. I know that. But something in me, some part that was operating just below the level of my conscious mind, understood that pulling it out was the wrong move. That staying calm, staying quiet, was the only way to find out what I was actually dealing with. And what I was dealing with turned out to be something that would have destroyed us if I had reacted instead of waited. What shook me to my core wasn't the camera. It was what my son said to me 3 days later without knowing what he'd done, and what it meant when I finally understood why he said it. Welcome to Dad's True Emotions. My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 43 years old, a high school history teacher, a father of one, and the owner of a slightly overweight golden retriever named Cooper, who has the sleep schedule of a philosophy student and the emotional intelligence of a very empathetic throw pillow. What I'm about to tell you is the strangest, most frightening, and ultimately most clarifying experience of my life. Stay with me all the way through, because the ending matters. Let me give you the before, because nothing makes sense without it. 16 months ago, I lost my wife. Claire was 41. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel more themselves, not because she tried to, but because that was simply what she was. She laughed easily and thought seriously, and had a way of looking at you when you spoke that made you feel like the most considered person in the room. She was also, for the record, the only person in our house who could find anything that had been put away incorrectly, which meant that after she was gone, I spent 3 weeks looking for the good scissors. My son Marcus is 16. He has his mother's eyes and her particular brand of quiet observation, the kind that looks like passivity from a distance and reveals itself as something much more precise up close. He stepped into our new, smaller version of a life the way water fills the shape it's poured into, steadily, without drama, grieving privately and showing up daily, which is more than I managed for several months. About 8 months after Claire died, Marcus sat me down at the kitchen table one evening with the deliberate energy of a person who has been thinking about how to have a conversation for a while and has finally decided the time has come. He slid a business card across the table toward me, like a tiny, 16-year-old CEO delivering news to a shareholder. He said, "Dad, you need to talk to someone." I said, "I'm fine." He said, "Last Tuesday, you made pancakes, ate them, cleaned the pan, and then came back downstairs 20 minutes later and made them again. You didn't remember making the first batch. I watched you do it." I opened my mouth. "The batter was still in the bowl," he said, completely unnecessarily. The card was for a therapist named Dr. Sandra Hollies. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, office on Meridian Street. Marcus had looked her up, checked her reviews, confirmed she had availability. He had done the research that I should have done and handed it to me because he understood, at 16, that I wasn't going to get there on my own. I kept the appointment. Dr. Hollies was precise and warm in equal measure, with the specific kind of calm that makes you feel simultaneously safe and transparent. She had a habit of holding her pen without using it, just holding it, occasionally clicking it, as if it were a thinking tool rather than a writing one. I spent 2 sessions watching her do this before I realized I was probably deflecting from the actual work. She gave me a name for what was happening. Dissociative episodes, not the dramatic variety, no blackouts, no waking up somewhere unfamiliar, just gaps, small ones. A conversation Marcus remembered that I didn't. A phone call in my recent history at 2 in the morning that I had no recollection of making. A meal made twice. The particular disorientation of looking at evidence of your own behavior and not being able to locate it in your memory. "It's a stress response," she said. "A grief response. Your mind is managing more than it can consciously process, so certain functions run on autopilot while the primary processing is occupied elsewhere." I said, "So part of me is just doing things, without the rest of me knowing." Essentially, Two things I want you to remember. First, these episodes are not dangerous. You're not a danger to yourself or Marcus. Second, she paused here in the specific way she paused when she was about to say something she wanted me to retain. During these episodes, the autopilot version of you is still you. Same instincts, same values, same fundamental drive to protect your family. If you ever find something in your home that you don't remember doing or putting there, don't dismiss it. Bring it to me. It may be more significant than it appears. I nodded and said, "Of course." I filed it away under the general category of things therapists say that sound profound and abstract until they become terrifyingly specific. The smoke detector. It was a Wednesday. Unremarkable in every way, gray sky, cold coffee going cold faster than usual, the general administrative texture of a midweek morning in November. I had noticed the low battery chirp from the hallway detector the previous evening, and had been ignoring it with the particular willpower of a man who has a perfectly good step stool and no current motivation to use it. I got up, I found the step stool, I climbed up. I unscrewed the detector cover, reached in for the battery, and touched something that was absolutely, definitively not a battery. I pulled it out slowly. It was small, black, roughly the shape of a large thumb drive but rounder. It had a tiny lens set into one end, no bigger than a pinhead pointing outward. A camera, a hidden camera. Positioned, I realized as I stood on that step stool with the blood leaving my face, to point directly at my bedroom door. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then I put it back, screwed the cover on, climbed down, picked up my cold coffee, went to school. I taught 2 periods of American history and 1 period of modern civics, and then sat in my car in the parking lot for 17 minutes at the end of the day, thinking about a lens the size of a pinhead pointing at my bedroom door. Then I drove home, made Marcus dinner, helped him with an essay about the French Revolution, and went to bed. 3 days, that's how long I waited before anything cracked. And here's what those 3 days looked like from the inside. Not panic, something stranger than panic, a cold, parallel awareness running alongside ordinary life. I made Marcus's lunch. I graded papers. I walked Cooper in the evenings along the same route at the same pace while quietly, privately, asking myself the question I was most terrified to answer. Did I put it there? Because here is the thing nobody tells you about losing sections of your memory. It's not just the forgetting. It's the uncertainty about what the version of you that was present while you were absent might be capable of. It's looking in the mirror at a face you recognize completely and wondering whether you fully know the person behind it. I started noticing other things. A small screwdriver on the kitchen counter I had no memory of getting out. A dining chair positioned in the hallway at an odd angle, facing the smoke detector. And then, the worst one. I opened my laptop browser history at midnight on the second day and found a search from 3 weeks prior, timestamped 1:47 a.m. Best hidden recording, devices under $50. I stared at that entry for a long time. Cooper put his head in my lap. I scratched his ear. He sighed with the deep contentment of a creature who has never once questioned his own decision-making. I envied him completely and without reservation. Then I scrolled up, and I found 2 more entries from the same night, earlier in the sequence. 1:31 a.m. Signs of unauthorized entry when nothing appears missing. 1:28 a.m. How to tell if someone has been in your home without your knowledge. I sat with those 3 search entries for a long time, and something shifted in how I was reading the whole situation, because the searches told a story that wasn't about someone losing their mind. They told the story of someone who suspected they were being watched and responded by trying to watch back. That was a protective sequence. That was a threat being recognized and countered. The question was no longer whether I had installed the camera. The question was what or who had made the other version of me feel like we needed it. Day 3, Marcus came home from school. dropped his backpack at the door with the specific violence that teenagers reserve for that particular daily gesture, opened the refrigerator, stared into it for approximately 30 seconds, the way people stare into refrigerators when they're thinking about something other than food, and then closed it and looked at me. He said, "Hey, Dad, who were you talking to outside your room last night around 2?" The air in the kitchen changed. I was at the stove, back to him, stirring something. I kept stirring for exactly 2 seconds longer than I should have, just long enough to arrange my face, and then I turned around. "What do you mean?" I said, the voice of a completely normal father asking a perfectly casual question. Marcus climbed up onto the kitchen counter, a habit Claire used to correct and that I have never been able to bring myself to stop. He said, "I got up for water. Your light was on under the door. I heard you talking. It didn't sound like a phone call." "What did it sound like?" He thought about it, like you were giving someone instructions. The pot boiled over. I turned back to the stove, reduced the heat, gripped the counter with both hands and stared at the rising steam. I thought about a camera behind a smoke detector. I thought about a chair positioned in a hallway. I thought about 3 search entries at 1:28 in the morning. I thought about Dr. Hollies' voice, precise and measured. "If you ever find something in your home that you don't remember doing, don't dismiss it. Bring it to me." And then I thought about something else she had said, something from our 3rd session that I had nodded at and filed away and not thought about since. She had given me a phrase, a trigger phrase, something she asked me to memorize so that if the other side of me ever needed to communicate something important, I would recognize it. She had said, "Tell Marcus to say it to you if things ever feel genuinely unsafe. You won't remember telling him to, but you'll recognize it when you hear it." Marcus had just said it to me. If you've been with me this long, please take a moment to subscribe to Dad's True Emotions and leave a comment below. I mean that genuinely. It keeps this channel going and means more than I can properly express. Now let me keep going, because this is where everything changes. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and I ran the same thought on a loop until it stopped making sense as language. What was I trying to catch? What was I trying to catch? What was I trying to catch? Cooper was at the foot of the bed, snoring with the complete existential confidence of a dog who has never once doubted his own sanity. I would have traded places with him without deliberating. At 6 in the morning, I got up. I went quietly to the hallway, stood under the smoke detector, and unscrewed it again. The camera was a Brixcam Mini. I confirmed this in my hallway pajamas by Googling it on my phone, which was possibly the most surreal product research I've ever done. Small, efficient, motion-triggered, and it had a micro SD card. The card was in the slot. I took the whole unit to my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, poured a cup of coffee I would not taste, and with the specific controlled energy of a man who is not prepared for what he's about to see but has decided to see it anyway, I plugged it in. The files were organized by date, motion-triggered clips between 30 seconds and 2 minutes each, weeks of footage. I sorted oldest first and pressed play. The first several clips were ordinary, empty hallway, Cooper wandering through at odd hours, completely purposeful in his directionlessness. Me, walking to the bathroom at night with the dignity of a person who believes no one is watching, which is to say, very little. And then I reached a clip from 5 weeks prior. 2:11 a.m. The hallway was dark, but the night vision rendered everything in that pale greenish gray that makes any footage feel like the opening of a horror film. I watched the empty hallway for 30 seconds. Then a shadow moved at the far end. Not me. The build was wrong. The height was wrong. Someone was standing just outside the full reach of the camera's frame, still, watching my bedroom door. The clip ended. I clicked the next. Same night, 2:17 a.m. empty hallway. Then the shadow again, closer this time. Close enough that for one single frame, I could see the edge of a shoulder. Dark jacket, male build. My coffee cup was halfway to my mouth. I put it down because my hand wasn't steady enough for hot liquid. I watched every clip. What the footage showed, laid out chronologically over 5 weeks, was this. Whoever this person was had been inside my house on 4 separate nights. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning. Always in the hallway. Never going further, at least not in the camera's field of view. Just standing there, watching my bedroom door, standing outside my sleeping son's room, patient and quiet and completely aware of the house's rhythm. I pushed back from the table. I sat in my kitchen in the early morning quiet and felt something happen in my chest that wasn't fear exactly. Fear had been the first 48 hours. This was something different, something that had moved past fear into a register that was colder and steadier and considerably more useful. Marcus came down at 7:15. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at my face. "Dad," he said, "you look like someone told you something." "Everything's fine," I said. "Have some cereal." He poured a bowl and sat across from me with his mother's forensic eyes and studied my face the way she used to study things, like a document she was reading carefully for the second time. "What's on your laptop?" "Nothing, something I'm handling." "You've been up since before 6. Your coffee is full and cold, and you're doing the thing where you don't move when you're thinking. You only do that when something is actually wrong." I looked at my coffee. He was entirely correct. I said, "I found something on the laptop. I'm dealing with it." He looked at me for another moment. Then he finished his cereal, picked up his bag, and before he left, he stopped in the hallway directly beneath the smoke detector and looked up at it for just a half-second too long. He didn't say anything, neither did I. I called Dr. Holly's at 8 in the morning and told her receptionist it was urgent. By 10, I was in her office with my laptop open on the table between us. I pressed play on the 2:11 a.m. clip without saying a single word. She watched it. Then I played the next one. Then she took her pen, the one she never actually wrote with, and set it down on her knee and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in 8 months of sessions. She was unsettled. She said, "Briar Daniel, how long have you had the camera?" "That's the problem," I said. "I don't remember buying it. I don't remember installing it. But the browser history on my laptop suggests I did, and the footage suggests that whoever I installed it to catch has been in my house at least 4 times in 5 weeks." She was quiet for a moment, hands folded in the particular way that meant she was assembling something. Then she said, "Walk me through the searches, in order." I turned the laptop and read them to her. The unauthorized entry search, the signs of break-in search, the hidden camera search. She nodded slowly. "This is consistent," she said, "with what I call a protective episode. Your subconscious recognized a threat before your conscious mind was able to process it. You acted on that recognition. You put measures in place." "I installed a surveillance device in my own home, Sandra." "You installed a surveillance device," she said, "because something in your environment triggered a protective response. The question isn't why you did it." She leaned forward slightly. "The question is, who has access to your house? Who knows your schedule? Who knows when Marcus isn't home?" And that question, clean, specific, surgical, walked me directly into a memory I had been stepping around for weeks. My neighbor, the man who moved in next door about a month after Claire's funeral, the one who introduced himself as Dennis Carver, who was always outside when I pulled into the driveway, always ready with a wave and a "how are you holding up," always somehow aware of when Marcus had after-school practice and I'd be alone. The one who had a spare key to my house, which I had given him 8 months ago after locking myself out during an episode I barely remembered, and he had produced the key so readily that I realized, standing at my own front door, that I must have given it to him before that day, in a gap I couldn't locate. I had given a man I didn't fully know a key to my house, and I didn't remember doing it. I said, "I think I know who's been in my house." Dr. Holly stood up, which she never did mid-session. "Daniel, Before you do anything, there is a phrase I gave you in our third session. A trigger phrase, something I asked you to memorize so that if the other side of you ever needed to communicate something urgent, you would recognize it. I told you to tell Marcus to say it if things ever felt genuinely dangerous. My chest went very still. "What's the phrase?" I said. She looked at me with steady, even eyes. "Think, what did Marcus ask you 3 days ago?" And standing in that office, laptop warm on my knees, Cooper probably asleep across my couch at home, every single piece of it locked into place at once, with the kind of terrible clarity that you cannot unfeel once it has arrived. "Who were you talking to outside your room last night around 2? That wasn't a casual question from a teenager who happened to wake up. That was a message from me to me. I drove home slowly, which for me is unusual. I'm not a slow driver, but that afternoon I drove with both hands on the wheel and the windows down and thought very carefully about Dennis Carver. Dennis, who had moved in next door approximately 3 weeks after Claire's funeral, a detail I had categorized under coincidence, the way grief makes you generous with coincidences. Dennis, who was friendly in that slightly too available way, always present, always ready, always knowing just enough about my schedule to be in the right place at the right time. Dennis, who got no mail. In 16 months of collecting my own mail daily, I had not once seen anything in his box. Not a bill, not a catalog, not even one of those pizza coupons that find their way to every address in a 5-mile radius. I had noticed this once. The other version of me had apparently noticed it, opened a file, and started building a case. I got home, Marcus wasn't back yet, 90 minutes. I went to my bedroom closet. On the top shelf, behind a sealed box of Claire's things I hadn't been able to open, was a manila envelope I had no memory of putting there. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside, a handwritten note in my handwriting, but tighter and more deliberate than my usual script, like someone writing carefully while under pressure. "If you're reading this, you found the camera. Good. You are not losing your mind. His name is Gregory Holt. Dennis Carver is not his real name. Check the envelope." My hands were not shaking. I had moved past the register where things made me shake. I reached into the envelope. 3 printed pages, public records printed from a database I didn't consciously remember accessing. A photograph. Gregory Holt, 49 years old. 2 prior convictions, one for stalking, one for breaking and entering in different states, both involving recently widowed individuals living alone with dependent children. The photograph was a mugshot. I held it up. Dennis Carver smiled at me from his own arrest record. I sat on the edge of my bed and read every page, and somewhere in the reading, the last remaining warmth of confusion left my body entirely. What replaced it was something architectural, precise. The other version of me hadn't just left evidence, he'd left a blueprint. I found the rest of it over the next 40 minutes. A USB drive taped to the back of the cabinet under the bathroom sink, every clip from the SD card already copied, edited, time-stamped, and labeled. 3 audio recordings made on my phone during episodes I didn't remember, recordings of Dennis in his own driveway, using his real name twice in phone conversations he didn't know were being captured. And in the kitchen junk drawer, underneath expired batteries and a takeout menu from a restaurant that closed 2 years ago, a folded piece of paper with a name and a phone number. Detective Christine Ackefer, she already knows, call her. She picked up on the second ring. "Detective Ackefer." "This is Daniel Reed," I said. "I think you might have been expecting this call." A pause, then, "Mr. Reed, yes, where are you right now?" "Home. Marcus gets back in about 45 minutes. "Good. I need you to do exactly what I tell you and nothing else until I say otherwise. Can you do that?" I looked out the kitchen window. Dennis's car was in his driveway. He was outside, washing it, moving with the unhurried ease of a man who believed he was completely invisible. Depends on what you're about to tell me, I said. What she told me in the clipped, efficient language of someone who had been building a case longer than I knew was this. The other version of me had walked into the precinct 7 weeks ago, during what must have been an episode, and laid out everything. The searches, the suspicions, the key, the patterns of movement. He had asked her to run Gregory Holt through the national database. Gregory Holt had an active warrant in 2 states. The previous case had escalated significantly. His last known victim, a widow with 2 young children, had required emergency relocation and a restraining order. He had been tracked to our city 4 months ago and then gone quiet until my smoke detector found him. We've been watching him, Detective Acaffer said. We needed him to make a move we could make stick, something that would hold in court. How long were you planning to wait? I asked very quietly. Mr. Reed. He has been standing outside my son's bedroom door at 2 in the morning for 5 weeks, I said. How long? Silence. We move tonight, she said. Act completely normal until I contact you. Can you do that? I've had a great deal of practice acting normal, I said. You'd be surprised. Marcus came home at 4:30. I had dinner going, real dinner, not the reheated sadness I usually managed on weekdays. Pasta, garlic bread, the whole effort. He walked in, stopped, and looked at the stove with the open suspicion of a teenager who has been conditioned to expect a certain standard of weeknight cooking. Who are you? He said, and what have you done with my father? Sit down, I said, and don't look out the front window. He sat down immediately, because Marcus Reed understands the specific grammar of his father's tone well enough to know when a sentence means exactly what it says. He said quietly, Dad, what's happening? I put a plate in front of him. I sat across from him, and I told him the truth, not all of it, not yet. The full picture was a conversation for another night when things were calm and we were both ready. But tonight, he needed what was relevant. The man next door isn't who he says he is, I said. The police are handling it tonight. I need you to eat, stay inside, stay away from the windows, and trust me. Marcus looked at me for a long moment with his mother's eyes. Then he said, Is this why you've been weird for 3 days? I've been weird for considerably longer than 3 days, I said. But yes. He almost smiled. Then he said simply, Okay. That word, 1 syllable, from my 16-year-old son who had every right to demand more information and chose trust instead. I held it together because that was not the moment, but I filed it somewhere permanent. At 9:52 p.m. my phone buzzed, Detective Acaffer, 1 word now. I stood at the living room window. 3 unmarked vehicles had materialized on our street with the quiet professionalism of people who do this for a living. Dennis's lights were on. His car was in the drive. What happened next took 9 minutes. I watched the clock. At 9:52, the vehicles arrived. At 9:56, 2 officers approached the front door and 2 moved around the back. At 9:58, the front door opened. At 10:01, Gregory Holt, who had introduced himself to me as Dennis Carver at Claire's funeral reception, who had shaken my hand and said anything you need, neighbor, walked out of that house in handcuffs. He turned his head as they walked him to the car, and he looked directly at my window. I didn't step back. I didn't move into the dark. I stood in the light where he could see me completely, arms folded, watching him with an expression that I imagined communicated something very specific and not particularly warm. He looked for a moment, then they put him in the car. I went upstairs and knocked on Marcus's door. It's done, I said through the door. A pause, then, did the good guys win? Yeah, I said, we did. I heard him exhale, then Dad. Yeah. I'm really glad the smoke detector needed a new battery. And I laughed, a real one from somewhere that had been locked for 16 months. I stood in the hallway under that smoke detector and I laughed until my eyes did something I wasn't going to stop. And I didn't try to stop either thing. I let both happen, right there in the hallway, because some moments deserve to be felt all the way through. I went back to Dr. Holly's that Thursday, sat in the chair, crossed one leg over the other, and told her the whole thing start to finish. The envelope, the blueprint, the USB drive, the detective, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" "Honestly," I said, "I feel like I owe myself an apology." "Why?" "I spent 3 months convinced the other version of me was the thing to be afraid of. Turns out he was the only one paying attention." She looked at me over the pen she never used for writing. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "the work now is letting him and you become the same person." I thought about that. "Do you think that's possible?" "I think," she said, "that a man who installs surveillance equipment, builds a complete evidentiary record, makes contact with law enforcement, and protects his son, all while the conscious part of him was too overwhelmed by grief to remember making breakfast, is not a man who is broken." She paused. "He's a man who refused to stop fighting even when he didn't know he was fighting." The room was very quiet. Outside her window, the city went about its Wednesday business. Ordinary, forgettable, the kind of afternoon where nothing is supposed to happen. I uncrossed my legs, sat forward. "Same time Thursday," I said. Dr. Holly's almost smiled. This time she let it land. "The camera is still in the smoke detector." I left it there. Not because I'm afraid anymore, not because I'm waiting for anything. I left it because something about taking it down felt like erasing something that mattered. Some version of me, the version who was terrified and exhausted and operating on grief and instinct, who didn't know what he knew but acted on it anyway, that version deserves to be acknowledged. He didn't fall apart when things got dangerous. He got quiet. He got organized. He left himself a trail of breadcrumbs through the dark and trusted that eventually I would follow them all the way home. That's not nothing, that's everything. Here's what I want to leave you with. We talk a lot about strength as something loud, as action, as confrontation, as the moment someone finally breaks and says the thing they've been holding. And sometimes strength is exactly that. But sometimes, and I've learned this in the most unusual possible way, strength is the quieter thing. It's the part of you that keeps working when the conscious part has gone dark. It's the instinct that says something is wrong before the evidence is clear. It's the decision to gather instead of react, to document instead of confront, to protect before you fully understand what you're protecting against. I didn't know I was building a case, but I was, and it saved us. Trust your instincts, not the panicked ones, not the reactive ones, the deep, quiet ones that operate underneath the noise, the ones that leave breadcrumbs, the ones that keep building even when the lights are off. They know things the rest of you is still catching up to. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Dad's True Emotions. It genuinely keeps this channel going, and I mean that from the bottom of whatever the past 16 months have left of my composure. Leave a comment. Have you ever found out that a part of you was handling something the rest of you didn't know about? I think more people understand that feeling than we admit. See you in the next one.